Hello and welcome to Everybody Pulls the Tarp. I'm your host, Andrew Moses. With me today, I have a very special guest, my good friend, Todd Burach. Todd, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. Nice to see you.
Great to see you, Todd. And for the audience out there, Todd is currently the Senior Vice President of the Entertainment Division at City National Bank. He works with athletes and entertainers around financial literacy, wealth management, and other matters which he'll talk about. Todd also played basketball at Syracuse University as a walk-on, which is a great story, which we'll get into a bit. But Todd, where I really want to start is what you're doing now, because you're doing some really, really fascinating, important work with athletes and entertainers, and taking great leadership in that industry. So why don't you tell the audience a little bit about what you're doing right now?
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew, and it's great to be here, and I'm excited to talk about my career at Syracuse and what we're working on now. What I'm doing at City National is something that probably folks think they know a lot about, but it's definitely a unique niche. So we work with a lot of trusted advisors, whether they're family offices or business managers or agencies that work primarily with professional athletes. And so my team's role is handling a lot of the financial affairs for professional athletes, their families, their businesses, and their charities. And so that could really mean a whole bunch of different things. But it's a lot of it comes back to financial education and being available to walk athletes and their families through the different things that they might be doing, from buying their first home to potentially financing the career after the career. So we like to think of ourselves, if the athlete is the CEO of their own enterprise and that trusted advisor might be the president of that organization, we like to think of ourselves as the CFO at the table.
You've talked a lot, Todd, about a quote that with the athletes and entertainers that you work with, it's not about your net worth, it's about your network. Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah. A lot of athletes are going to make money and a career. You can look at the stats, right? Professional football careers now, I think, are on average less than 3 years in length. So a lot of our clients actually retire from their first career and have made all of that money when they're in their mid-20s, if they're early 30s, if they're lucky. And so the quote, it's not about your net worth, it's about your network. So much of what happens when you retire from your sport depends on the people that you know. And what we try to encourage our athletes to do, it's one of these other quotes of, to get comfortable being uncomfortable. So some athletes can walk into a corporate office setting, which doesn't look like a practice facility. People are wearing suits that can be kind of intimidating. And some athletes will shut off and they'll not try to network and get to know a lot of the folks around the table. Or, they might look at LinkedIn as something that they don't need right now, so they won't get on LinkedIn and try to build relationships with folks. We try to encourage our athletes to build those relationships with people outside of the locker room, because some of those folks are going to be the ones that are going to help them springboard into the next phase of their life and to do it seamlessly. So having your financial affairs in order is critically important. Just as important is having the right team of people around you, but also having that network around you to help navigate and ultimately open doors for what comes after football or what comes after basketball. And honestly, it was true for me, right? Like, I didn't play all that much at Syracuse. I think most of my stats had single digits and not per game. Those were in aggregate over the course of my career, right? I think I played 9 games and scored 9 points, 2 if you count my 1 dunk in the preseason. So that would have been 11 anyway. But even for myself, transitioning from Syracuse basketball into the working world, I was able to, build a network as a student athlete at that point for folks outside of basketball. It helped open, the first doors for me in my career. So I talk to athletes, whether they're 12-year vets in the NFL or the NBA, or, walk-ons or, college athletes who never transitioned to pro sports. And they're all at different stages trying to build their network and really using sports as that springboard. So, your network is critically important, and some folks are more natural at building those connections, and some folks it takes a little bit more coaching. But the good thing about athletes is we're generally coachable.
I want to talk more, Todd, about relationships. You mentioned relationships there being really, really critical. You've done a lot of work to build relationships. You have tireless work ethic. I know that from knowing you so well, and you're also a true relationship oriented person. Talk about some of the work that you've done around financial literacy and financial literacy education, and how that's enabled you to build relationships and go that extra mile for your clients and friends in the marketplace.
Yeah, in a prior at a prior company, I was building a nationwide financial literacy program for athletes. And the whole reason I got into sports in the first place was there was a 30 for 30 documentary that came out years ago called Broke. And I think I have 50 followers on Twitter and for a little private Twitter account. I was so gassed up by this movie that as I watched it, I like live tweeted it. When I watched that film, and there was some, there's a very famous article within my world from Sports Illustrated in 2009 by Pablo Torre, who's gone on to have a really good broadcasting career, about how and why athletes go broke. And I think I've read that article, 25 times. And being around players in college, teammates of mine that went on to have long careers overseas or long careers in the NBA playing pro ball, I got really interested in why athletes across the board, might not be maximizing their financial futures. And when I was at my prior company, they had an opportunity to build this financial literacy program. And they basically wanted us to think about the whole thing from scratch. What are people doing now to try to educate athletes? And what can we be doing differently to actually get the message across and to change behaviors? That's the most important part, is changing behaviors. So I started working closely with a former NFL All-Pro, Bart Scott, who's a big media personality here in Jersey, and Antoine Walker, who played for the Kentucky Wildcats, won a championship in '96, part of that heralded '96 NBA draft class, and spent many years in the NBA, and started traveling around the country with those guys, going to pro teams and colleges to talk about financial wellness. And what we did was really interesting, because we had no PowerPoint presentations. There was no suits. It was like, let's simplify this down and talk about some street smart stuff. Because ultimately, if you can put the right team in place around you, if you know how to say no to friends and family, you're going to be on a pretty good trajectory. So it was really cool for me at that point to kind of rethink the way financial education was. But also, to your point, a lot of what we were doing was all relationship based, right? I wasn't going to be able to go talk to the Seattle Seahawks rookies without having built a really good relationship with their player development director. And the player development director for the Seattle Seahawks has been in his spot for a long time. And folks around the NFL recognize him as one of the leaders in that space. And so, kind of crossing two paths here with this story, but we were rethinking what we were doing from a financial literacy perspective. We were doing it really thoughtfully. And we were building really good relationships within the sports industry at the same time. And the thing about sports, as is the case with a lot of entertainment segments, is that everybody knows everybody, right? There's not that many agents, there's not that many advisors, there's not that many CPAs that specialize in sports. So everybody knows everybody. And when you start to build a good reputation for, caring a lot about what you do and being passionate, people start to talk. So financial literacy for me was the springboard into what I'm doing now. And it's been unique at City National, because we're not out there trying to have relationships directly with the athletes or, their families. We're building relationships with the trusted advisors. So it's a little bit of a unique model, but what we started to do from a literacy at the bank is really the coach. So if I can talk to an advisor in the sports industry who works with 100 athletes and tell them and give them, what we're seeing in the space, and give them, best practices that they can then take to their 100 athletes, makes a big difference. And that changes behavior. And one of the things that I've realized in all of this, like, you can get up there and give a PowerPoint presentation about a mortgage, but unless you're buying a home, you're not really paying attention. So much of the financial literacy for athletes and for anybody really is, when you go through something, be comfortable asking questions if you don't know. It goes back to that premise of being comfortable being uncomfortable. A lot of folks don't want to be the person to raise their hand and say, I don't know, because they think everybody else in the room knows. But the reality is, especially about finance, most people don't know. It's just certain people are comfortable to ask the questions. And so we try to coach the athletes and try to coach their coach to get them to recognize the symbols when guys don't know what's going on and they might need a little bit more educating throughout the process.
So I'm sure that the relationships that you're building now, like you described, you're able to relate back to your time on the court playing basketball. Let's go back in time a little bit, Todd, to Syracuse, and you walk on to a legendary and iconic basketball team under Jim Boeheim, and talk about that for a minute, because being a walk-on is a unique circumstance, I'm sure, and I would love to hear a little bit about that experience and how you immersed yourself in the team culture at that point as a walk-on.
I think it's important to note how it first started, because I went to Syracuse not intending to play basketball for the team, right? Basketball is a love of mine. I was in the student gym my freshman year. I didn't play my freshman year. They had 5 walk-ons at the time who were all on the national championship team, which was my senior year in high school. And so they didn't have a spot. But back then, Syracuse didn't actually have the facilities. We didn't have a basketball practice facility, the Mello Center, which has been built since. They had limited training facilities indoor for the different sports teams. And so there were occasions where the men's basketball team, believe it or not, would get kicked to the student gym to practice. And so I was in the gym on a Saturday morning, just by myself, getting shots up at like 8 o'clock in the morning. And the Syracuse basketball team just walks into the student gym. And so I'm over there just shooting on a hoop by myself. There's like one court between me and, like the 10th ranked team in the nation. And I'm just up there getting shots by myself. And the associate head coach at the time walked over, and I had happened to know a couple of the guys who were scholarship freshmen, same year as me, from AAU basketball in New Jersey. And coach walked over and he's like, "Hey, the guys say a lot of good things about you. I've been watching you over here getting shots up. Would you be interested in coming to work out with us and, potentially playing on the team next year?" And it was all because when I was in the gym getting shots up by myself, I was going hard. And I didn't realize that this was going to happen, that coach was going to walk over. It was kind of just a whole chance encounter. But I remember back to my AAU days when my dad was my coach, and he would always tell me, you don't know who's in the gym watching you. Right. You might be in a game and I might have had a moment where you'd be yelling at a ref for getting mad at yourself or your teammate. You don't know who's in the gym watching you at that moment in time. So you always have to be going hard. And for me, it ended up working out because I ended up with a spot on the basketball team. So what happened the rest of my freshman year, my roommate, my sophomore year, when I was my first season on the team, was a 7-foot center. And he was the team captain. It was his senior year. He was the starting center on the national championship team. And so for the second half of my freshman year, before they gave me a spot on the team, I was basically just like a crash test dummy. So I'm 6'5". I was probably 195 at the time. This kid's 7 foot, 270. And I'm sitting there banging with him in the post for days on end, right? It was literally, coach would throw him a ball in the post. He would sit there, do a drop step, elbow right through my chest, and lay it in. They could have used a pad, but I guess it was better to just have a live body. So, I quickly realized that to earn my spot on the team, I was going to have to do certain things that I wasn't used to doing when I was the best player and the team captain as a senior in high school, right? Or the best player on my AAU team. Because I went from being the first option or the second option on offense to being the 14th or the 15th man on the bench. And so the role had changed a lot for me, but it was, that first, how I even got on the team was just a crazy scenario. And that's still something, as I'm working from home now, and we've talked about this before, Andrew, no one's in my office watching me, right? My wife might walk in throughout the course of the day and be like, "What are you even doing in here?" But it's on me as I'm getting, the shots up in the gym by myself. It's on me to push myself and to motivate myself. And that's something that I took away from my time at Syracuse.
What an amazing story, and just the wisdom, I love the quote, the perspective that your dad shared, right? That I think it was, you don't know, who's watching you practice, right? You don't know who's in the arena watching you play. And I know, that has to drive you today, right? There, like you said, there has to be times when you think about that, right? I don't know when a client is watching. I don't know when my next client is watching.
Yeah.
And you think about that every day. I mean, you must, right?
How I got the job that I have now, how I got into sports originally, is really just because I created an opportunity for myself. When I wasn't working in sports, I was like 4 or 5 years out of college, and I had this realization that I want a job in sports, right? I want to wake up every day and love what I do. And so my prior company didn't have a sports division. So what I did was I went on social media and I reached out to random people that I don't know, but that I follow and respected, that were doing unique things in sports. And there's this woman in particular, Alicia Jessup, who writes, she's a professor now at Pepperdine, sports law professor at Pepperdine. She writes for The Athletic. And in like 2010, I reached out to her randomly, and we're friends now. And I was like, hey, Alicia, I love what you're doing. I'm really interested in athlete wealth, right? We talked before about the documentary Broke. I'm really interested in it. I've got some unique ideas. Can I just write some stuff for your blog and just put it online? And she's like, absolutely. Articles for her on the sports law blog, not paid, just doing it to kind of, get some work in my portfolio. And I had done all this work. I started going to conferences on my own dime, on my own time. And it was at that point where my prior firm was like, hey, actually, we're launching a sports and entertainment division. And I was like, well, this is great. Also, look at all this work that I've already done on my own. So I had already done the work. And then part of promoting myself a little bit from a business perspective, but also from a personal career perspective, I've always been active and thoughtful about sharing stuff that works for me on LinkedIn. And I've always been really active about keeping my network on LinkedIn an actual network, right? Like I hate connecting with people that I don't actually know, or connecting with people who don't know me, but don't ask to talk to me when they ask to connect. So over the years, I've been really proactive about sharing my story on LinkedIn. And City National Bank, when they were trying to continue to build out their sports business, they actually found me through LinkedIn. And it was one of those things, like I had no idea that they were looking for a sports division, like someone to add. But to go back to that in the gym analogy, like people are watching you on LinkedIn, right? People are watching you in the office every day, whether you know it or not. And it might not always show up, but you've got to put your best foot forward, whether it's on digital platforms like LinkedIn or Instagram, or if it's in the gym or in the workplace. So that's been an important part of my career development to this point.
You're obviously a hardworking guy, like we've talked about, and a well-networked guy, like we've talked about. But you're also humble, and you're willing to do whatever it takes for the team, for the organization. I know that you wore 3 different jersey numbers during your time at Syracuse. Talk about that for a minute, because I think that speaks to who you are and that shaped you, and it's a great story.
Yeah. So after I made the team at the end of my freshman year, before the summer, the equipment manager called us in to the equipment room to pick out our numbers for the next year. So like you're an athlete, like your number is so much to you, right? It has so much significance. And so I went in my freshman year, after my freshman year, and I had gotten to the equipment manager's office like 10 minutes after another freshman walk-on. So like neither one of us, if anything, I should have had priority because I was a sophomore and he was a freshman. But walk-ons, you were whatever place in line you got, and you got your number. So I came in and I asked for the number 12 actually. And the other walk-on had taken it. So I was like, all right, fine. I'll take 23. It was an available number. And a lot of jersey numbers at Syracuse are retired. So your selection is limited and no one wants like the number 53. So I took the number 23. So after my sophomore season ended, my first year on the team, the equipment manager called me back in and he said, hey, I hate to break it to you, but you're going to have to pick a new number. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, Eric Devendorf is actually coming in. He's a high school All-American. He's going to be a freshman and he wants the number 23. So I was like, okay, no problem. I'm just happy to have a spot on the team. So I was like, I'll take number 11. So I wore 11 for my junior season. And then my junior year comes around, equipment manager calls me back in, and I'm not making this up. Paul Harris is coming in. He's a high school All-American. He wants the number 11. I said, no problem, Danny. Let me take the number 12, which was actually the number that wanted my sophomore year, my first year on the team, but I couldn't get it until my senior year. So yeah, I don't know that anyone else in Syracuse basketball history has also worn 3 numbers. I think that's a record. But yeah, 3 numbers in 3 years. And on senior day, they only framed the number 12 for me. So I'll just always remember myself as the number 12. But yeah, 3 years, 3 numbers in 3 years.
What a great story, and I think it speaks to how challenging it is to be a walk-on, right? And that you've got to be resilient, and you've got to know your role and know your place, and grind it out every day.
Yeah, we my first season we played Princeton. It might have been like the first game of the year, and up until a few years ago, Coach Boeheim in early games used to play man-to-man before we got into like the meat of the season, where he would just play 2-3 zone in a half court set the entire year. So when we were playing Princeton, he wanted to test out the offense, test out the defense, and have them play man-to-man against the Princeton offense. And if you know anything about the Princeton offense, it's all motion based. So, they try to run the shot clock down, what was 35 seconds at the time. They would pass and cut and pass and cut and pass and cut for the first 20 to 25 seconds of every shot clock, thinking that by the end of it, they'd catch you sleeping, right? They pump fake to half court, and they'd go back door, right? The Pete Carroll famous Princeton motion offense. It's almost as famous as the Syracuse 2-3 zone on the defensive side of the ball. So for the first 3 weeks in practice, the scout team, the last 5 guys on the bench, myself included, were running the Princeton offense against the first team Syracuse man-to-man defense. So all of the scholarship players, guys that would go on to play in the NBA and overseas for many, many years, right? And I remember, so like 2.5 weeks into the 3 weeks of us running the Princeton motion offense against the Syracuse first team, they knew what we were doing, right? We were literally running the same play. It's not like it was recreating the wheel every time. It was the same play every time. And so Demetrius Nichols was guarding me. Demetrius is he just retired from a long career in Europe, played in the NBA for a little bit. 6'8", lengthy, small forward. And so I'm a 6'5", not so lanky small forward. And I'm playing offense for 3 straight weeks, Princeton offense against Demetrius Nichols. And every time I would catch the ball in the wing and I'm supposed to dribble to the center of the court, ball handoff or whatever it was. And so Demetrius, by the 3rd week, was cheating on the play, right? He knew what I was going to do. So I'm thinking in the back of my head, like, let me make a good impression on coach. Let me just try and, keep Demetrius honest when we're running this play. So instead of going to the middle, I kind of fake middle and I try to go baseline. And so I take a dribble to the short corner, which is sort of in that spot between the block and the 3-point corner shot, right? If you're not too familiar with basketball. So I've got a little bit of breathing room. So I pull short corner and I pull up for a jump shot. And I'm like, I'm going to hit this. Like Coach Boeheim is going to see me, go the other way, knock down a jump shot on our starting small forward. And so I pull up and I go to shoot, and Demetrius blocks the crap out of my shot, right? And I'm like, oh no. So Coach Boeheim, this is true story, Coach Boeheim runs on the court. He goes, Burach, what the hell are you doing? And I'm all nervous because it's my first 3 weeks. And so I'm sitting there like after the play, just like really shaken up. And Coach Hopkins, who's now the head coach at the University of Washington, walks over, pats me on the shoulder. And he's like, hey, don't worry about it, kid. At least he knows your name. And that for me was like my welcome to Syracuse basketball moment, where, I went from being the starter, captain, the main point in my high school team, to when I got to Syracuse, I had a very different role. And that role was mostly important in practice 5 out of 7 days a week. And I was there to prep the guys on the first team and the second team. And that was kind of the realization for me. And I was really willing to accept it, that my role wasn't to go out there and score 25 points a game, take 25 shots, right? You better believe if Boeheim put me in the game, I was going to get 25 shots up, but that wasn't going to happen. My role was in practice was to push the guys, was to teach them what the other teams were going to do. And that was a new experience for me, but something that I cherished and that I learned a lot from over, 3 years on the team.
But the key word there that you said is you're part of the team. And I there's a story that you've shared with me before where Jay Billis reminded you that you are part of the team. And I think that it's a great lesson for the audience.
So Syracuse, I mean, obviously the Carrier Dome every year sets on-campus attendance records for a single game, right? I remember my junior year was Jerry McNamara's senior game against Villanova, and we had like 35,000 people in the Dome for a basketball game, which is an unbelievable experience. And so one of my seasons, we had college game day at Syracuse where Jay Billis and the whole crew, Reese Davis and those guys, they would bring the ESPN broadcast to your college town, and they would do the whole broadcast during the day for all the games on ESPN, and then you would be the showcase game at 9 o'clock at night. And so a couple of my good friends from growing up made the drive out from Penn State to come to that game. And, they came, I hadn't seen them in a while. The basketball season's really intense schedule wise. And so I wanted to spend a little bit of extra time with them. And the night before every home game at Syracuse, we used to take the team, we would go stay at a hotel like 25 minutes off campus. And the whole point of that was so that you wouldn't go out and party the night before the game. And I wasn't much of a partier to begin with, but so I went up to one of the assistant coaches during practice and I said, "Hey coach, 3 of my best friends from growing up came into town to see the game tonight. I'm not going to play tomorrow. Let's be real. And is there a chance that I could just hang out in my apartment with my buddies? I'm not going to go out. I'm not going to drink. But I just, they made the trip out here and I want to just, be able to spend a little bit of time with them because we had practice and other things going on throughout the day." And so our coach called Jay Billis over, who was on the ESPN staff and just watching practice that day. And he's like, "Hey, Jay, come here for a second." So he walked over and he goes, "Jay, Todd, why don't you ask Jay what your question was?" I was like, so I explained the whole thing to him. And he goes, "Son, are you a part of the team?" I said, "Yes, sir." He goes, "You're going to the hotel tonight." And that was it. That was the conversation. So there have been moments over the years, and I got into one Big East game against St. John's when it was like a 13 or a 14-point game, and quite honestly, that was like the closest real game action I ever got. But I remember a couple of years after I graduated, one of the walk-ons that I played with, a kid named Justin Thomas from California. If you remember the 6 overtime UConn Syracuse game at the Garden, I was actually there in attendance in the stands. But if you remember that game, 6 OTs, a lot of guys fouled out. Justin Thomas got in the game and at the end of the 5th overtime and was a key piece of, defensively and had a couple of steals or rebounds at the end of that game. And so you don't know if your number was going to be called on game day. More often than not, your number wasn't called on game day. But in practice, you had to be ready to go because especially in the middle of the Big East season when like Jerry McNamara, Hakeem Warwick, and Josh Payson, these guys were getting beat up. Demetrius Nichols were getting beat up by UConn and Notre Dame and Pittsburgh physically. And we would have a couple practices between games. They weren't really going 100% of practice, right? But the second team was still getting reps. And so you would get called in at those points. So, 14, 15 guys on a basketball roster, you might not get called on every day, but you had to be ready to go at any point because your number could get called and you would be a critical piece of, success. And I think what happened with Justin Thomas in that 6 overtime game, like that showed itself right there.
Same thing in the business world. The same thing when you're hustling for your clients, when you're working as part of a team, and you show that every day.
Yeah.
So Todd, I want to talk about something that you're involved with right now. Before we let you go, the Pro Sports Business Management Summit that you host every year in New York City. I know it got curtailed a little bit this year because of the social distancing and the COVID-19 crisis, but it's a phenomenal event that you put on, and it means so much to so many in the sports industry. Do you mind talking about that for a moment?
Yeah, absolutely. The big part of my passion and what I do on a day-to-day basis is, like I said before, about changing behaviors, changing the narrative when it comes to athletes and their wealth. And I think, generally speaking, in the last 10 years, athletes have gotten a lot smarter about how they spend money, how they save money, and how they plan for what happens after their playing career. And I've been in a fortunate, and I'm in a really unique spot in the industry in that I have great relationships with a lot of the trusted advisors to professional athletes. And so what I've tried to do in order to continue to change behaviors across the board is bring together the community of folks that are working with professional athletes, their families, their businesses, and their charities, bring all of these people together once a year in New York City for 2 reasons. One, to network and meet each other, because while a lot of them compete on a day-to-day basis, I always say there's enough business to go around for the good people in the industry. And if these folks can share best practices with each other or perhaps collaborate from a business perspective and we can be the reason and the means to get them together. I've seen a lot of really great things happen by putting smart people in the room together. The other thing that we try to do with the summit is introduce topics and speakers and best practices from industry leaders, things that we're seeing in the space. So given that I talk to all of these different advisors and agents and athletes and their families, I know what is kind of generally being thought about and worried about across the board. And so what I've tried to do every year is curate an agenda that hits on a lot of those topics. So for example, a couple of years ago, when esports was starting to become a hotter topic from an investment perspective, a lot of it, our advisors were saying, hey, do you know anyone in the space? Are you familiar with this space? Because athletes are young, they're gamers, and they have money to invest. And so a lot of them were asking questions about, how do I invest in esports? Should I invest in esports? And so through our network, we assembled a panel of individuals to come in and talk specifically about that. What should athletes be thinking about and doing or not doing as it relates to esports? One of the things that I was, our summit this year obviously is postponed until next year due to COVID. One of the conversations that we were going to have, and that I'm still going to keep on the agenda, is what I call managing the family dynamic. So a big part of being an advisor to an athlete is knowing how to work with the player's family, whether it's spouse, kids, parents, because those often bring unique challenges to the relationship. So we were going to have the family member of a very prominent NBA player. And this family member has been a key part of managing the inner circle, navigating the roadmap from college to pro, from pro to max contract for this individual athlete. So we were going to have a conversation with her about how she's done such a good job of navigating the family dynamic for this athlete and how she's worked with advisors. So the summit is really all about bringing that community together, allowing those folks to network and sharing best practices. And it's been really cool for me to see it grow, put a lot of work in behind the scenes. And we've got people reaching out now that we didn't know, and they're like, hey, I saw that, I love that, let me participate. So it's been really exciting.
What a great program that you've put together, Todd. And you sure are pulling the tarp every single day, for City National Bank, for your clients, and for the athletes and entertainers around the country that you're making an impact on. It's been a great privilege to have you on the show, Todd. Stay safe, be well, and we will talk soon.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. Great to see you.
Take care.
All right.